Everyone. So be sure to give a good look or a second look to that movie clip I played at the end of the last lecture. Well, I think it tells us a lot about romanticism, and I'd like you to think about it and put it in your own words. What you find romantic about it, or revealing about the nature of the experience of love and the experience of oneself. Um, is there a formula? The idea of marriage, the marriage proposal is that there's a kind of formula, a ritual that you go through, and that constitutes, consummates love in a certain way. What it means to be a couple or the family. Um, these are such preoccupations of the Romantics. You know, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, it seems like it's about this weird old mariner, but it's really about marriage. It's about, interrupting this marriage ceremony. And also, like Frankenstein, like all of Jane Austen, it's all about marriage. It's about reproducing the the family, reproducing the species, how we um, mediate ourselves, and Frankenstein is really about probing, like, how much can we engineer that, that there's. So I'm suggesting there's something Frankenstein, like Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, and this in the scene of the picnic where he's like putting everything in place and like, take this, you have a role to play in this um, formula, um, abstract formula that I'm directing. Um, and so the Romantics, beginning with Burke here, are invested in the idea that we can't, to know the formula for ourselves just too thoroughly is deadening, literally. Um, that we need this obscurity, this chivalry, this sense of um, duty and purpose in something that is much larger than ourselves, that we can't entirely understand with our own minds, but feel that that's what gives us a sense of purpose. Um, is this belonging to something grander than ourselves. A big part of the Romantic skepticism about knowledge, which is associated with Enlightenment, the idea that the world can be decoded and understood in the manner that Dr. Frankenstein represents, reduced to formula, and depicted as facts, um, has to do with the Romantic appreciation of history. That's what I've been talking about in terms of action. That, life is something that happens rather than something that is simply understood. And hence the metaphor of the wind. It's something that's only really understood in the event. Wind is something that happens to things. You can't have wind in a vacuum. That's an important aspect of history. That it's this movement that's we're all involved in. The famous, another metaphor for history is the river. Heraclitus says that you can't step through the same river twice. It's always flowing on. And the attempt to fix it as, one certain thing and hold that definition across time is misleading. So that's a big concern of Burke. So it's interesting here. We're looking at Romanticism in writers with quite diverse political and social perspectives and values. Burke is known as the founder of modern conservatism and really a firm believer in tradition and the aristocracy and uh, virulent critic of the French Revolution. But he's defending or he's criticizing the French Revolution in the name of tradition, in the name of history. He says history has rich lessons to impart. We inherit values and wisdom in these traditional social forms. And that all gets kind of canceled with the radicalism of the French revolutionary belief and individual freedom and the ability to create oneself anew. Burke's favorite attitude or conception of historicism is inertia. So he thinks a lot about aristocratic property and sort of the virtue of the land. We're really going to see this, and it's really going to be important in Pride and Prejudice. The virtue that's embodied in Darcy's estate, in Darcy's very body, like his silence. He doesn't need to assert himself. There's a virtue in his reticence, an aristocratic kind of wisdom and moral integrity, and the beauty of the estate. I'm going to be praising the BBC, the 1995 BBC miniseries version of Pride and Prejudice quite a lot, and really encourage you to check it out in addition to reading the novel, of course. It's wonderful, and it's kind of a classic in its own right, and really does justice to Austen and teaches, I think, some valuable lessons about Austen's own conservatism. She's likewise quite Burkean in her the value she sees in Darcy's reticence, the dangers she sees in this modern presumption to recreate oneself in the manner of Lydia and Wickham. But what we see in the Romantic poets, for the most part, is at least when they're young. Wordsworth changes as he gets older and becomes quite a Burkean himself, quite conservative, and that's why he gave you those two versions of Old Man Traveling to compare. As I think you can see, it's sort of politics to the revision that the later conservative Wordsworth made. What we see in a lot of these poems that I've given you to start the course is the experience of an event that the narrator of the poem kind of fails to control. Often we see these poems begin with a kind of complacency, a presumption to understand, much like in that movie clip that begins with a man setting out this picnic table, sort of as if in control, directing the scene. There's likewise a kind of complacency here at the beginning of Simon Lee about age. He's a little man. Old man dwells a little man. 'Tis said he once was tall. For 530 years he lived, a running huntsman merry, and still the center of his cheek is red as a ripe cherry. Um, so there's I think the key theme of age is acknowledged here, and uh, crucially in terms of number. That number is associated with that enlightenment, science, empiricism, um, presumption to understand and quantify experience, reduce it to, an item of knowledge, and drain it of its kind of qualitative uniqueness. Um, that same uh, that's crucial in the great poem "We Are Seven" too, that we'll be looking at. Like, this man has been diminished by age, but he still has um, he's still merry with his cheek as red as a ripe cherry. Like this sing-songy rhyme that's also spoken of in terms of number. The song, a rhyme and rhythm. A foot is a kind of number. Um, uh, will become at the end of this ballad a moment of sublime ineffability. The prospect of the old man's age defies representation. Then the poet is reduced explicitly to saying, "I can't finish this. If you just think about it, and maybe you'll be able to finish it." But that breakdown of the narrative representation, uh, opening up into this kind of sublime emotion, is prepares an event for the reader. That's like this poem. It's like you thought you could just read through this as a kind of mechanical routine, but I've surprised you, and you're now in the position of the creator. As the reader has become the author, or is challenged to become the author. Likewise in Aeolian Harp, and this is a crucial poem about wind. What you notice here, so first of all, this is an example of a romantic genre, a genre invented by the Romantics, and Coleridge and Wordsworth in particular, the conversation poem, where implicitly or explicitly, he makes it explicit here with this opening apostrophe addressing his wife. The poem is one side of a conversation with a silent interlocutor. Tintern Abbey, Frost at Midnight, or other famous examples. So notice here how, like what I was just saying about Simon Lee, the poem begins with a kind of complacent assurance that I can name the world, I can grasp the world in my concepts and understand it in terms of clear concepts. He's decoding the world around him in this initial verse paragraph here. And this is disrupted. This is what is the effect of the Aeolian harp. A strangeness erupts. And that, this is typical of Coleridge. Kubla Khan starts the same way. Everything at the beginning of Kubla Khan is bounded, girdled round, controlled, contained by the pleasure dome. But then the next paragraph begins, but oh, that great romantic chasm, that deep romantic chasm. sublimity of the sexual passion. Um, it defies representation. Is this again? This like swoon and falls down in this caverns measureless to man. Measure punning on the empiricism. I can't measure it. I can't put a number to it. I can't quantify it. But it's also referring to poetry. I can't put it in the measure of my poem. It does a similar thing here with the notion of feet, footless and wild. It's this passion that is evoked by the Aeolian harp, this dissonant sound. Check out the recording, and you'll see what I mean. It's very evocative, and it's played by the wind. It's like translating out of the wind this demonic, otherworldly music underlying what we think we understand on the surface. So just notice in this first section how everything is decoded. Everything's contained, like in the Pleasure Dome, our cottage. Everything has its meat emblem. That's an appropriate symbol. So the jasmine and myrtle are meat emblems of innocence and love. So love here is all contained, just like in the Pleasure Dome. Mark the stars serenely brilliant, so such should wisdom be. The star is like wisdom. How exquisite the sense snatched from yon bean field, the world so hushed. The stilly murmur of the distant sea tells us of silence. So experience is almost like suspended in the poet's understanding. Everything's wisdom, silence, love, innocence. It's all, you can see a kind of compulsive mind wanting to grasp everything. Keats, we'll see, famously defined his key literary theory of negative capability in contrast to what he called Coleridge's irritable grasping after fact and reason, wanting to understand everything. So we can see Coleridge acting that out here. But what's great about Coleridge is his self-disruption. And so here, as in Kubla Khan, it's like this erotic intoxication overwhelms him. And he he hears this demonic, weird music of the Aeolian harp and begins to our kind of otherworldly erotic fantasy that's arguably a little sadistic. It has to do with the pleasure and pain, like some coy maid half yielding to her lover, pours such sweet upbraiding as must needs tempt to repeat the wrong. He's talking about, this is not innocence and wisdom and love and light and silence and peace. This is a conflicted or eroticism of conflict. I'm tempting you to repeat the wrong. Do me wrong. No means yes. My sweet upbraiding, my sweet complaints. So that's I think there's something dangerous in where he's going here. And I think that's, as in Kubla Khan, that's where Coleridge gets good, is when he's is like off the rails. Thought he understood what he was doing, but he's going to a place that he doesn't understand. And this is what he means by primary imagination, too. This kind of almost godlike creative power that's creative because it doesn't fit with what we already know. It's creating a new. You can see the sense of divinity and magic. Remember, I talked about in Kubla Khan that miracle device is like the technology of poetry is a to transmits miracles. Um, uh, Long sequacious notes over delicious surges sink and rise, such a soft floating witchery of sound as twilight elfins make when they at eve voyage on gentle gales from fairyland, where melodies round honey dropping flowers, footless and wild like birds of paradise, nor pause nor perch, hovering on untamed wing. So again, like Kubla Khan, he's speaking of a poetry that can't be heard, measureless. It's a poem about an unhearable poem. It's so beautiful. It can't even. I'm speaking to you about my dream of a poem. Old Man Traveling is about a dream of a poem. That's disrupted in the early version, disrupted by history, disrupted by politics, when war, the reality of history, sort of the embodied, the flow of the river, of the wind, um, bursts forth to interrupt the complacent, narcissistic fantasy, self-contained fantasy. So what's just cool about this is, and the world is too much with us, it, is the kind of self-critique that Wordsworth performs in these poems. He's really probing the problems of his own attitude, of his own mind. Because it begins like a Wordsworth poem. That's what's so amazing about it, is it really sounds authentically Wordsworthian. But he the history, this exposure of historical reality snaps the poet out of this poetic dream and reveals it as a narcissistic illusion, as deluded. So it's really powerful, and I think its juxtaposition of history, the bare bones kind of brutal poetry of history itself. This man is poeticized by the poet in a very, typically romantic way, compared to nature, and this harmonious integration into the background nature scene. Just a simple statement of historical fact has a poetic power to it, reveals a reality that mocks even all the refined kind of poetic style of the a very Wordsworthian style. So Wordsworth is self-mocking here, in a way I find very admirable. Uh, the other thing to notice, though, too, is that the poem kind of the first part, the Wordsworthian sort of narcissistic part, it kind of it begins to break down. That you see it sort of bursting at the seams, or turning on itself, becoming self-refuting. Um, that he's so idealizing this man that he starts speaking in circles, not entirely making sense. Long patience has such mild composure given that patience now that does seem a thing of which he hath no need. It's like, wait, he's so patient that he's not patient. Like, he's by nature led to peace so perfect that young behold with envy what the old man hardly feels. He realizes, oh, I'm envying something that's a figment of my own imagination. Again, very narcissistic. I'm just looking in the reflection of my own mind. Um, so, and this is so powerfully, so economically sublime. It leaves this what the mariner, what the old man says here, leaves the poet speechless, and that's a very typical and familiar romantic gesture, to be struck mute. Like the speaker of the poem is silenced. He just quotes. Once he quotes the old man, I keep saying mariner because he's quite like the ancient mariner in playing this disruptive function, as a kind of embodiment of this sublime strangeness of history and historical pain. He's quoted, and then the narrator of the poem, the speaker of the poem, never returns. It leaves a pregnant silence. It serves the same function as Simon Lee without having to say so. And Simon Lee, the narrator of the poem, says, "You have to finish the poem." He says it out loud. But here it's implied that the narrator should come back and resolve the story that he started, rather than just breaking off with this quote. Ozymandias is the same. The narrator is just lost. It's silenced by the quote he offers of a different speaker. So 17 years later, he republishes it and simply leaves off the quotation of the old man entirely. It ends with peace so perfect that the young behold with envy what the old man hardly feels. So, and that implicitly also kind of, it's as if what was poetically pregnant in these kind of self-refutations and circular formulations, now he's just left as if it were, pretty poetry. Just like, oh, look at the beautiful old man. It's so, such a clear enactment of, I think, the maybe historical complacency of his growing conservatism, that he's like, I'm not acknowledging now. I'm suppressing that awareness of historical suffering, and just pretending that it's all beautiful. So Wordsworth becomes the first poet laureate, looking away from the reality of historical social suffering for the sake of glorying in fantasies of poetic beauty and harmony with nature and the glory of tradition, and paper over, history. Turn it. Now this is not really about an event. It's about sort of idealizing history and actual material experience, and putting it in a neat little frame, and just idolizing it, fetishizing this fantasy. So I've really tried to point out some radical tensions in these poems that problematize reading, that makes it a question how to read them, makes it problematic. And that in turn makes us reflect on the problem of reading history and our place in history. It makes us think about ourselves as historical actors. That's exactly the thing I'm saying that Wordsworth wants to suppress in that later version of the Old Man Traveling. So think about on Wednesday, maybe we'll talk about The World is Too Much With Us, and the other Lucy poems I gave you to look at, Strange Fits of Passion and A Slumber Did My Spirit Seal, composed on Westminster Bridge. How can you identify tensions in these poems? What are the problems these poems present to the reader? How do they make the reader reflect on reading and history? Westminster Bridge is like Tintern Abbey. It codifies history again as a number, a date. What is the role, the kind of poetics of number of the abstract date? It's like a newspaper byline, these two poems, they just, or a journal entry, but that's history. It's not accidental. What is he trying to make us think about? History as represented in a number versus what we get in the poem. It's sort of a non-title, like, why doesn't he give it a title? What's with that gesture? A more proper title. And we'll be jumping into Jane Austen. I've organized this class in a little bit of a convoluted way. We're jumping back and forth a little bit chronologically. So I want to introduce these themes of kind of the poetics of history, critique of rationalism and capitalism, consumerism, and before we got into Austen's great Pride and Prejudice, right up there with the most popular favorite books of all time for lots of people. It's just a joy to read. It's so fun. But again, like I'm suggesting about these poems, the pleasure of reading Jane Austen goes hand in hand with, or disguises this rendering of intense historical conflicts. Like Old Man Traveling, there's a lot of pain just beneath the surface that comes out in just very subtle ways. A lot of pain, a lot of fear of downward mobility, economic vulnerability, especially of women. It's a game of life and death, and literary style, especially irony, and these kind of tensions that I've been talking about, are really crucial. So much of maintaining one's class status and language. It has to do with suppression, hiding one's own concern about it. As soon as you admit you're scared, then you're a goner. So it's only by this elaborate dance. Dancing is such a key motif in Pride and Prejudice. The dance of social, all these layers of social pretense. Um, uh, and it's quite a kind of jujitsu where we're acting as if we don't care, precisely because we care so much. Another great Jane Austen movie of Sense and Sensibility is made by Ang Lee, who became famous for martial arts movies, and it's not an accident. I think it's pretty interesting to look at Austen's sort of the dueling rhetoric of her characters as a kind of martial art. All right, I'm looking forward to talking about all this stuff on Wednesday.